Rodney talked about the games that he played when he was a child and the roles that he played. What I remember about childhood games is you always had to decide who was going to be the good guy and who was going to be the bad guy. And I remember thinking, well, what if I'm just an average person who may be a little good or a little bad and maybe not a guy either, but that seemed to be the rules of the day. Many things are going to be said, I believe, about these years that we are living through now, and one of them will be that there were many false dichotomies, there were many gross generalizations, and there was much false news, and that was all true. Either we are patriotic or we accept and want everything to stay exactly as it is, or we are anti-American anarchists. Either we are in the position of wanting to take care of number one, or all the number ones who are uber rich will continue to benefit, or we are socialists, determined to wreck the entire structure of our economy. Either we can live in fear or we can live in denial. Either we can accept what is happening or we can try to find joy in our lives. It goes on and on and on. In this week of our orange skies and our red suns, with the snow of silt on our vehicles and on our streets, more than one person mentioned to me that they were trying to figure out if the right word was actually apocalypse or Armageddon for what we are living through. In this time of climate change and also technological transparency, the truths about who has and who does not are more apparent. And in order to cover up that divide, there is this divide and conquer strategy paired with false news and scapegoating, which really are enlisted to keep things the way they are. All of us, worried about the fact that our skies were the wrong color, did have a lot of stress and worry this week. And I watched as it came out with my neighbors on our Nextdoor app. Call the Pacheco people and tell them that the homeless encampment needs to stay in Concord. One group started to stay about midweek. And then there were the people in Concord saying, no, we want to push it back into Pacheco. And they went back and forth all week. This dichotomy never ever considered that we might use our shared resources to find an unused parking lot, of which we have a great plethora of in our area now today, or a designated place for those folks who are trying to exist in this air, in their vehicles. Maybe even provide some services, some food, or a porta potty. We were stuck in the Concord-Pacheco dichotomy in my neighborhood. The pandemic has brought to the fore that we face many challenges, and we're going to be unfortunately pitted against one another as those resources shrink unless we think about it differently. And I think in these next few months, we're going to be hearing a lot about what it is that we see as the way to get through changing and difficult times. We can fall into these dichotomies easily because we're taught from a very young age to think about either or choices, not both and choices. Either this is right or this is right. They can't both have a piece of the truth, and we can't find and seek truth in between, even though we know from our own lives that we've learned time and time again that often the answer is found in between. An especially pernicious dichotomy is the one that says you can either take care of yourself or take care of others. And that has come thread through our culture, this sort of me versus we problem that people are painting. Either I keep my level of health care, which gives me lots of choice, or we have to have some other inclusive healthcare system, which is going to take away all those choices for me. And yet many public health officials believe that part of the devastation of this pandemic is because of the huge gap between the kinds of healthcare that people have in this nation. So actually, that me was actually a we all along. If we redistribute resources and we provide more social services than law enforcement services, then someone won't be watching my property as much. And yet, the devastating dearth of any assistance for those who are struggling in these very challenging economic times means that impoverished people around us are having to resort to things including petty crimes and property crimes. And then the me again becomes the we. If we regulate billionaires, then I won't have a chance to become one of those billionaires, and that is my American dream and right. And yet, by focusing on the needs of the very, very wealthy, we've allowed so many to lose their dream businesses in these days. Our particular belief heritage, these values that are upon me today in this beautiful stole, say that we have a belief in the inherent worth and dignity of all people and also the interdependent web of life. And I've begun to think that we could create a false dichotomy between those two, and that perhaps what we are actually called to do is to affirm the inherent worth of our connections, because that is how we can ensure that we all live with dignity in this world. And that is something we need to consider. False dichotomies can be silly, like when someone says you either wear a mask and be a real merriman, or they're really going to be deadly. Philosopher Martin Buber explores in his 1923 classic I and Thou this. He says, the one primary word is the I, thou. If thou is said, then there is the I, and if I is said, then the thou is always said along with it. The primary word, I, thou, can only be spoken of, for it is all one whole being. What he is saying is that I cannot exist without you and my relationship to you, and that you cannot exist without your relationship to me, and that this is how we must learn to live. He said this in 1923. What kind of world would we be living in now if we had listened a little bit more back then? We know that we can hold multiple truths together and listen for their resonance, faith and science, me and we, spiritual practice and action focus. For yes, this is a time to let our inner resources hold and strengthen and guide us. And it is also a time for us to take our values out into the streets, especially in these next crucial weeks when we will be called upon to do things that aren't always comfortable, like pick up the phone and call someone and encourage them to vote. We can begin with an either-or that we may have set up in our minds. We may have to dispel some things that we're holding that are keeping us from the basic sustenance of our lives. For example, I will stay unconnected from what gives me joy or even from community until we can do this the way we were doing it back in January and February. This is also a false either-or that we need to let go of. So back to the apocalypse and Armageddon. Even if it is the apocalypse, which is the end of the world, where the sky turns orange and the moon blood red, etc., even if it's that, we do not have to have Armageddon, which are those battles at the end time where people are pitted against one another. Divide and conquer, demonization of those asking for the basic right to life, scapegoating, these are all tactics that will be used as we fight to defend our democracy and our nation in these coming months. I believe, as Michelle said, that we can be the ones to leap across the false dichotomy when someone says, for example, that if we offer more options and services to everyone, it will bankrupt our economy, because we need to listen to those who are struggling to find the means to get by in an ever-changing world. We can be the ones who will say that won't embrace the false dichotomy that says we can either restart our economy or take the steps we need to reduce our dependence on the fossil fuels that are clearly accelerating climate change. We can speak up when people try to silence the rights of those demanding the freedom to live without being targeted by an unaccountable and increasingly weaponized law enforcement system, and not say that their voices must be muzzled if we want to preserve our democracy, because that doesn't really make sense if you think about it. Our thinking can rise above these false dichotomies. I've been doing a lot of physical training this summer, and one thing that I've come to realize is that to jump or leap well, you actually have to have a good surface to start with, to push off from. And those are our values, our tradition, those things that we need now to not only give comfort to our own lives, but also to offer to the world. And let those be the all-embracing love that guides us, that holy place of truth, which is the foundation from which we rise. From there, we can help leap over these false dichotomies, if not in a single bound, then perhaps in multiple conversations. We can be the ones who remind people that we can have faith and science, me and we. Recognizing all of this is possible, for this is how we build a home for one another in this scary, burning, churning world. Let us be this messenger who don't need truths reduced to sound bites, who aren't lured into the false comfort of blaming others for what we are experiencing. Let us be the people of the head and of the heart, of love and truth-telling, of faith and science, of me and we, of spirit and action. In these ways, we will continue to build a shared home for all in this world, using our superpowers to honor ourselves and each other when we remember that we are all connected. This is what our faith requires of us. This is how we know we can go on.